If you're pre-diabetic or diabetic, you have probably been told over and over again what not to eat. No sugar, no bread, no rice, no pasta, no fun. But what if I told you that there's a whole class of foods that you probably overlooked, and this class of foods might potentially help stabilize your blood sugar levels, increase your insulin sensitivity, and overall improve your health living with prediabetes or diabetes? Well, in today's video, we are going to talk about fermented foods. And the wonderful thing about this class of foods is that a little goes a long way. All you need is a little bit added to the foods that you're already eating, and these can potentially cause you to have lower sugar spikes, less cravings, more energy, and overall improved control of your prediabetes or diabetes over time. Now, why do fermented foods help? Well, two main things, right? So one thing is that in the process of fermentation, where bacteria and fungi and so on work on the food, essentially what these germs do is that they break down the naturally occurring sugars and starches in some of these foods. And so if these sugars and starches are already broken down or eaten up by these good germs, right, it means that these are not going to be going into your bloodstream and contributing to high blood sugar, right? Second thing is, in the process of breaking down the naturally occurring sugar and starches in the foods, right, there are positive or beneficial substances or chemicals that are produced, substances like acetic acid and lactic acid, and these acids essentially decrease, right? So whatever starch is in the rest of the food that you eat, right, these acids block the enzymes in your body, in your digestive system, that further break down starches in your gut. And so if the starch is not being broken down, it means that it's not able to be absorbed as sugar into your bloodstream. So this is a further benefit of eating fermented foods, right? So let's get into examples. I'm going to lay out for you 8 different types of fermented foods that you can incorporate into your diet starting today, right? Or over the next few days if you go to the supermarket, right? And these can potentially go a long way in decreasing your blood sugar spikes, stabilizing your energy, blocking or decreasing food and sugar cravings in general, and improving your life as a person having diabetes or pre-diabetes. Okay, so the first fermented food we're going to talk about is, and I have a few of them here, not all, but the first one is kimchi, right? Kimchi and sauerkraut as well. So these are similar. Kimchi and sauerkraut, essentially these are fermented vegetables, and in the case of kimchi, usually it's a mix of cabbage and carrot fermented, but for sauerkraut that's cabbage alone, right? And so beneficial bacteria break down these vegetables, and in the process of this fermentation process of these vegetables, you have the release of good nutrients from the vegetables. Okay, in addition, the same healthy acid, well, healthy, right, the beneficial, I should say, acids, right, lactic acid, that is produced in the process of fermenting and breaking down the starch and sugar in these vegetables. And what you have is that you have slower absorption of starch in your gut, and so your blood sugar will rise much less. Now, these things, kimchi and sauerkraut, a little goes a long way. So you're not going to load up your plate with these things. It's just a spoonful on the side, like a condiment, and it enhances the rest of your meal. Okay. People would normally think of probiotic foods in general, and I would have said that earlier, I forgot, but essentially when you hear probiotic foods, fermented foods, you just think probiotics. And these are foods I talk a lot to patients in hospital, especially those I'm going to be giving antibiotics, as I talk about them using these foods to replenish good bacteria in their intestines that the antibiotics would have killed, right? So kimchi and sauerkraut are one such example, right? Now, another thing too is that with these, the vegetables, because of the fiber is food for good bacteria that would be in your gut, okay? And we refer to those as being prebiotics. So prebiotic is something that feeds the probiotics, okay? The probiotics are the good bacteria and the good, fungi and so on, yeast, right? And then postbiotics are the good chemicals that these good germs produce in your intestines. So the kimchi and the sauerkraut would give you the beneficial acids, they give you the prebiotic fiber as well, and then you have nutrients within the vegetables themselves, phytonutrients that help antioxidant capacity and just help with your overall health, okay? Additionally, a lot of times kimchi, it comes spicy, it has chili pepper in it, and if you have heard me speak before, chili pepper is one of those foods that over time, consumption of chili pepper may help your body produce more of a good type of fat called brown fat. And the good thing about brown fat is that it uses a lot of energy, okay? And you can think of it as eating up the bad white fat. So having more brown fat in your system means that you're going to be able to burn up more of whatever sugar and energy you take in from your food in general, right? So that's the first one. We took a little long with that. Second fermented food is tempeh. My son loves tempeh. I bought some the other day. I went to a store that had quite a bit of tempeh. And tempeh is essentially fermented soybean, like soybean cakes, and you might be able to make it out there, right? So fermented soybean cake. And the good thing about tempeh, right, so it has prebiotic fiber as well, because from the beans you'll have fiber. Beans in general have some amount of starch, but the fermentation process will eat up some of that starch, so it will be a low starch food compared to fresh beans, okay? And then in the process of fermentation, the bacteria breaking down the nutrients in the beans, you have a release of some of the minerals and vitamins like B vitamins and so on in the beans. They are released so that they're more available to your body when you do eat these beans, okay? So overall, it will be easier to digest, all right? So that's tempeh as our second example. Third example is kefir, and this is one of my favorite fermented foods, right? And we just added the milk to this one. We make our own kefir at home. We've had the bees, a nurse of mine, almost 10 years now. We've been keeping our kefir grains growing, okay? So we just had some today, and kefir is fermented milk, okay? So the milk is fermented, and in the process of fermenting the milk, okay, the lactose, which is the milk sugar, which can carry your blood sugar levels out, but that gets broken down by the good germs, the bacteria, the yeast, and so on, and ultimately you get produced lactic acid. So kefir has a very nice tart taste, and in active kefir, the real deal, you're going to see bubbles because it's a live food, and so you get good good bacteria, good germs, okay, to help feed your gut, yes, but then you get the lactic acid, which is going to slow down the absorption of whatever other starch or sugars that you have in your system, because it's going to block the enzyme, at least partially, that breaks these things down. So overall, you're going to get that good benefit from something like fermented milk kefir, okay? The fourth example is pickles. Now, not all pickles are the same. So most of the pickles that you see in the store would essentially be cucumbers submerged in vinegar, and oftentimes there's added sugar, right? The pickles you want the real cultured pickles, right? It should say on the label live active cultures, all right? And the same thing with these. You have the prebiotic fiber from the cucumbers themselves, you have the good bacteria, and then you have the lactic acid, right? That good acid that's going to decrease the breakdown of starch on the rest of your plate, right? And therefore potentially decrease the glucose spike after meal, decrease your cravings and so on. But like I said, you have to make sure the pickles say on the bottle live active cultures, and usually these good pickles would be kept in the refrigerator, so not shelf stable, okay? The fifth example is sourdough bread, and again, like pickles, not all sourdough bread is the same, because some sourdough bread just has some, like a little bit of acid added to make it sour, but real sourdough bread is made with a starter, okay, and so it's flour and maybe some salt and the starter, and it, in the process of fermenting the wheat flour, again, the same thing, breaks down some of the starch in the flour, in the wheat, all right, and in the process of fermentation, the lactic acid is produced, which is what gives sourdough that nice tart, sour taste. First time I tasted sourdough bread, I was like, wow, this bread is really sour, but it's quite tasty. It's still starchy, so you're not gonna wanna have loads of bread and nothing else. If you have sourdough bread, you're gonna wanna add things to it, fatty things, meat and so on, so you stabilize that carbohydrate starch with fat and protein, okay? But sourdough bread would definitely have somewhat of a lower glycemic index compared to regular bread, right? Less starch, and then the lactic acid, organic acids, okay? Sixth example is apple cider vinegar. Now, this is not necessarily a food, right? And it is not necessarily a it's like the product of fermentation. So apple cider vinegar is a product of fermenting apples, okay? So you ferment apples and you result in the acetic acid. Think about acetic acid, and you might have heard people talk about this, others talk about this, but acetic acid, it's not 100% clear how it decreases the glucose spike after a meal, but it's felt that taking about a tablespoon, mixing it with water, because you don't want the acid to damage your teeth, okay? But a tablespoon in a glass of water before a meal, that acetic acid, it is felt, blocks the same enzyme amylase that breaks down starch. So if you're not breaking down starch from your food, it is moving further down your gut, your intestines, before it gets into your bloodstream. So lower blood sugar spike after meal, and that is a wonderful thing. If you have the raw apple cider vinegar that has what they call the mother, right? It basically has some bacteria and fiber and so on in that residue or sediment at the bottom of it, okay? So that's apple cider vinegar. Then some example of fermented foods, buttermilk. I first heard about buttermilk when I came to Mississippi. A lot of people in Mississippi like buttermilk, and essentially buttermilk is that liquid part after churning fermented cream to make butter. Then that liquid part, right, is buttermilk, and it's sort of thick, and it has some good probiotics in it, but it also has same lactic acid and that tart taste. And again, just like we said, these organic acids block the breakdown of starch in your gut, so that it's not as much is not available to go into your bloodstream, okay? So cultured milk, and again, you have to make sure it's the real deal, the real cultured buttermilk, as opposed to some shelf-stable fake type of buttermilk, okay? Buttermilk, you know, you can add that to soups, to smoothies, and to sauces as well, if you decide to make a sauce or dressing, right? And our eighth and final example is fermented olives. You're going to see lots of different types of fermented olives in stores, like in natural food stores, Whole Foods, and some other natural food stores where you see them right there in the deli section. And fermented olives, of course, olives have a lot of healthy fat, okay? And then olives also have a lot of good nutrients called polyphenols. They have a good antioxidant benefit, right? Help quieten that inflammation in your body. Again, you have to make sure that it's actively cultured or fermenting olives. They have live active cultures as opposed to being pasteurized, because pasteurization after the fermentation process is going to kill the good bacteria, okay? And it's just not going to be as good. So essentially, those are the 8 examples of fermented foods that pre-diabetics, diabetics, anybody really, but certainly a pre-diabetic, diabetic, and diabetic, you're so accustomed to hearing what not to eat, and you are left confused. Well, if I have no options, then it's as if I'm going to starve, right? But what you can do is start by adding some of these fermented foods in your diet. So you might be overwhelmed. So, okay, go ahead and eat what you're accustomed to eating until you can figure out how to pull back certain things. But immediately you can add these fermented foods, right? And like I said, when I started, a little goes a long way. A little spoonful of kimchi or sauerkraut, all right? A teaspoon or tablespoon rather of apple cider vinegar, right? A few olives, right? A little goes a long way with these foods. You mix and match. One day you might have a glass of kefir. I had that today. We don't have kefir every day. One day you have a glass of kefir. Another day you have some sauerkraut. Another day you have some fermented olives. Another day you have some buttermilk in a soup. Okay, so you mix and match and incorporate all these fermented foods quickly again. Kimchi or sauerkraut, tempeh, kefir, fermented pickles, sourdough bread, apple cider vinegar, cultured buttermilk, and fermented olives. So definitely, I want to challenge you listening to this video that this weekend, right, assuming you're going to go to the supermarket this weekend, I want to challenge you to try at least one of these foods from this list of 8. Incorporate this in your diet. Just try. You have a lot of options. Just choose one. And remember, I said the beauty about fermented foods is that a little goes a long way. All right. So definitely incorporate these, and I expect that you're going to notice with stabilized blood sugar, your energy is going to improve. Your cravings are going to get better, right? And then when these things get better, you're going to sleep better, and overall, you're going to feel better. You're going to feel more in control, right, of this condition that does not have to control you, but you can be in control of prediabetes. You can be in control of diabetes. Thanks for watching this video. If you found it helpful, definitely go ahead and share it with somebody else who would benefit from this information, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I want you to tell me which one of these fermented foods you are going to try this weekend. Take care, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.